Good evening, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the clerk has an amendment. It's LCO 10072. Would you please ask the clerk to call it and I be allowed to summarize?
Will the clerk please call LCO 10072, previously designated Senate Amendment Schedule B?
Senate Amendment B, LCO number 10072, offered by Senator Fasano, Senator Whitkus, Senator Formica, Senator Franz, Senator Minor, Representative Claridis, Representative Candelora, Representative Hoydick, Representative O'Day, Representative O'Neill, Representative Davis, Representative Ziobron.
Gentlewoman is asked leave of the chamber to summarize his objection. Hearing none. Representative Ziobron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment before you is the state budget for the upcoming biennium. This bipartisan document also contains the bond package, school construction language, and the language necessary to implement the budget. Mr. Speaker, I move adoption, and I ask that when the vote is taken, it be taken by roll.
Questions on adoption, Senate Amendment Schedule B. When the vote is taken, we will take it by roll call, ma'am. Would you remark further?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I would. Mr. Speaker, I'm standing here before my colleagues and friends in this chamber because of the courage of 3 senators this afternoon. Senator Doyle, Senator Hartley, and Senator Schlossberg took a courageous step today to really put forward a bipartisan effort on behalf of the residents of the state of Connecticut. Before I go on about what is in our document, I would like to take a moment to thank the staff of the Appropriations Committee and the Finance Committee, specifically also LCO, OLR, the Office of Fiscal Analysis, and I also want to give a special thanks to my colleagues and friends, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Representative Walker, Senator Austin, and Senator Formica. We have all traveled a very long, difficult road. While we haven't always been together, certainly over the last few months, we were together starting in January, and we've walked a very long road. This morning, I had a completely different speech prepared for today, and I started that speech with some quotes. I've since thrown that speech in the garbage, and have found a new quote that I would like us to think about and hold dear as we think about what we're doing here this evening. Mr. Speaker, that quote is this: I learned some valuable lessons about the legislative process, the importance of bipartisan cooperation, and the wisdom of taking small steps to get a big job done. And the person who said that is Hillary Clinton. And today, we are the second step of getting a big job done. Today, it's a new chapter in a budget book that started on April 27th, 141 days ago, when the essential framework of the amendment you have before you was prepared and ready to be voted on by the Republican caucuses in the Senate and the House. The appropriations process brought us there, and today we start that new chapter, and I hope together. The 3 senators this morning, while I watched today in the chamber, had the courage of the conviction, courage to say no to the same solutions, and say yes to putting Connecticut first. Is our budget perfect? No. How could anyone produce a perfect budget that has to address a $5 billion budget deficit? But Mr. Speaker, this budget takes the small steps to get the job done. It does. There's critical steps in this document, and I'm going to talk about those in a minute. During the last 6 weeks, as I have sat with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, we've talked a lot in those leadership meetings. And those meetings started with not dollars, not a budget document, but long-term structural changes to put our state back on track. A budget without them dooms us and our beautiful state to fail. We need this budget because we need those long-term structural changes to put us on a pathway forward. This budget has a very conservative spending cap definition. We desperately need that spending cap definition if we're going to retain and pull back the path that we're set to go on. It has a very firm bonding cap definition. We enact prioritize progress, a transportation plan. We do all kinds of other things, like modifying the state employee retirement system effective 2027. And that's something I hope my colleagues really think about. We are not talking about changing the contract today. We're talking about enacting changes statutorily effective 2027. Those changes that we have put forward in this document were not taken out of thin air. They were taken because we went and obtained an actuarial analysis, which, Mr. Speaker, I have shared with some of my Democrat colleagues in the hopes that they could understand exactly what we're talking about in overall savings. If we enact the changes, the 4 simple changes in this document that we have before you today, by 2046, we will have saved over $10 billion. That is not a Fantasyland number. That is not some number we pulled out of the sky. That was a number produced by the actuarial company that's on contract with the Office of Policy and Management, the governor's office. And we paid for that because we believed, and we've talked about it for months, that we must do more. We accept that the CBAC contract that this chamber voted on, we're not undoing that. We accept it, we take those savings, we have modified our budgets at least 8 times between the House and the Senate. But we're saying we need to sharpen our pencils, we can do better. And that's what this document does. There's other long-term structural changes as well that are critical, and in fact were agreed upon in those leadership meetings. Some of those that were agreed upon by my friends on the other side of the aisle in this room were things like enacting a 90-day turnaround time for environmental reviews from DOT, required that all waiver renewals for Medicaid services be approved by the committees of cognizance, required that the Connecticut Health Hospital seek private partnerships, require public hearings in committees of cognizance to require audit report recommendations. One of the things that's really surprised me, Mr. Speaker, in my role on the Appropriations Committee is when we get the audit reports of every agency in our budget, sometimes those recommendations are made over and over and over again. We're putting in triggers to make sure we do deal with the foundations of Connecticut and change the way we've been doing business. Long-term structural changes are absolutely necessary if we are going to make our state a place that we can live, retire, and have our children settle their own roots here, and that's what this document does. Some highlights, Mr. Speaker, of our document. There's no new taxes, and we reduce taxes in our document. We increase education funding with an ECS formula that's buried into that formula, although we do add money onto it because we can't expect municipalities to, on a dime, change change those things, so we have to give them sustainability and predictability in the future. So we've backfilled those communities, all communities. We didn't pick winners and losers. We did it based on an ECS formula. However, we've also done something else very critical that some of the stakeholders have asked us to do, and that's create a task force to create an ECS formula. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, last summer I spent half my life in this building trying to develop a spending cap definition. And I worked with some of my very good friends on that side of the aisle all summer long. And at the end of that summer, what did we have to show for our work? A thick report that probably sits somewhere on somebody's desk or on a shelf, never to be enacted. This process puts forth a task force, and what we say is, if you don't develop a recommendation by next year, the trigger is the ECS formula in our document. Because we no longer can continue to do things the way we always have. We provide significant municipal support and mandate relief, and I'll be honest with you, some of the pieces of mandate relief, some of my members over here are having some issues with. No doubt about it. Again, change is not easy. And if we're going to ask towns and others around us to change, we have to be willing to do that ourselves. And that's what this bipartisan budget does. We prioritize transportation. We support seniors. Like many of you, I've been horrified to learn that while we didn't cut funding to senior meals, because of the very high utilization rates, our seniors are not getting fed. They are on waiting lists for Meals on Wheels. Senior centers across the state have eliminated some of those meals on certain days of the week, and thank God for the wonderful dedicated volunteers in our community who have stepped in to fill that void. But this budget provides more funding, $2 million more, so that our seniors can have sustainable and predictable meals 5 days a week, 2 times a day. Because we know it's not just feeding them that's critically important, it's about providing an atmosphere and an opportunity for them to socialize and be with people. This is a safety net issue. I'm very proud that my colleagues took the idea of Passport to Parks. I'm very proud of my passion and work on the Environment Committee to develop a Passport to Park program, but that wasn't my idea. It was buried in the back of a budget submission that I discovered in my work and due diligence as ranking member of the Appropriations Committee in January. And every single committee meeting when we talk about sustainable park funding, I brought it up. And to her credit, Senator Kathy Austin agreed. And she started working on it too. That's how great ideas happen when you work in a bipartisan way. We don't have to worry about taking credit as long as it gets done. This budget, this document does that. We reduce the size of government. Enough is enough. We cannot afford to have all different agencies doing duplicate services. So, Mr. Speaker, for an example, the Department of Housing has been pushed into the Department of Economic and Community Development. Are they losing staff? No. They're being absorbed into DECD. Cost savings, back office savings, all of those things. Rent, heat, air conditioning, electricity, having them all under one roof. The same thing goes for the State Department of Aging into the Department of Social Services. The Office of Early Childhood back to the State Department of Education. The Office of Higher Ed back to the State Department of Education. We make PURA a standalone agency, so they are no longer housed in another agency that may have different views of their independent work. And we also make the hard choice to eliminate 2 commissions. while we like the work that those advocates do, we just simply cannot afford it. We have done a lot of things that I know I have ideas and friends on the other side that look at them as true savings. But we also don't have other things in our budget, which is a term that I know makes you cringe, but we don't have earmarks in our budget. We have one. It's for the city of Groton, because they have kids from the Coast Guard Academy that don't get counted. And we believe that those people who are willing to serve our country deserve to have a good education. And we give a little extra money for that town to handle that influx. Mr. Speaker, I know that we are at an unprecedented place. I know that we are sitting here today potentially not where we thought we would be. However, the courage and the conviction of our colleagues who are elected to represent both Democrats, Republicans, unaffiliates, Green Party members, Libertarians in their district decided that they were going to put a stake in the ground earlier today and do something to move Connecticut forward in a bipartisan way. I'm asking my friends on the other side of this room, a few of you, to find that courage. Find the courage to say that we're going to do things differently, that we're going to work in a bipartisan way. This budget is a bipartisan budget. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to answering any questions my colleagues have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Representative Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,